Oh my.
You hear stories about like, athletes when they put their Instagram story about like how they performed that day, and it just takes one comment to like push you over the edge, and you can ignore all of the other positive comments, for example. And so there is a risk for increased mental illness, and as a result, increased risk of suicide among some groups of athletes. So the question for me then comes back to, what can we do about it?
Hello and welcome to the Content Collective's Derailed series. This week I'm joined by Chris Hartley. Chris has a PhD in sport psychology and he works at the Institute of Sport in Stirling, predominantly with swimmers. Chris came on the podcast actually because I was doing a race with him and I was talking to him, and I can't remember why, the Olympics I think were on, and then we were talking about depression in sport, and I mentioned something about depression in sport, and Chris was like, that was what my PhD was in. And this is something I think about a lot. I've had my own experiences with depression in sport, or sport-related depression. Just with getting so sort of intensely involved in mountain bike racing and kind of neglecting other parts of my life, and then burning out with racing and kind of having to work out, find your purpose and meaning again, essentially. We talk about my experiences, or I talk to Chris quite a lot about my experiences, and we kind of use it as a example of what a lot of athletes go through. He gives a lot of advice in terms of what he actually talks about with his athletes, what he works on with them, and most of it comes down to balance, really. And this relates not just to sport, but to just everyone's life in general. We talk about the kind of culture in the world of like, we kind of glorify people that sacrifice everything and give everything up for one thing, and actually a lot of times that's not the best thing for people. And a lot of these very successful athletes, this doesn't actually, they might, even if it does work for them in sport, it doesn't always work for their mental well-being in general. So it was a really broad conversation. It was one of my I really enjoyed talking to Hartley. I've thought about the conversation a lot since we've had it back in July. I really do think you're going to like it. If there was one that I would recommend listening to, it would be all of them. This one is very good. I think you're going to like it. If you do, just give the episode a like. I'm not going to push this whole like, commenting and subscribing thing anymore. You could just do one. Let's just start. You could just like this video. You subscribe if you want to, but you don't have to. Just like the video. You don't even have to like the video. But maybe just think about it. Just like the video. We're going to jump in now to my conversation with Chris. Hope you enjoy it. That's good. So, Chris.
Morgan.
We were at Tweedlove, Vallelujah.
That's right. It was Vallelujah, and then King and Queen kept running into you.
Yeah. And we're at the top of the last stage of Vallelujah, and I was talking to you about, we were talking about the Olympics, and I was talking about swimming, and how I felt like, swimmers are dedicating their whole lives to this thing that, most of them won't get a medal, and even the ones that do, they have like not much. It's not like a lifestyle sport like mountain biking. Swimmers and it's also quite brutal in terms of the training. Like, they get up super early, they sacrifice Absolutely. A lot. And then we were talking about sort of depression in sport, and like the problems with stopping competing, and how it might be particularly difficult for a sport like swimmers. And then you were saying that's what you did your PhD in.
Yeah. So thought I'd steal the opportunity to just plug what I do for a living in there. But yeah, no, just when you started sharing your story, like I was immediately getting flashbacks to like some of the work I do in my sort of day job, and thought it was really interesting to hear your story from a mountain biking perspective, just because, well, like you say, when not just in mountain biking, but when you're giving so much of your time, energy, money into a sport, that actually it can have negative consequences in some cases. And when you transition out of the sport, whether that's planned or unplanned, actually that can it can lead people to some dark places. So we actually thought, we've got some kind of overlap of interest here. Let's go for a ride. Let's have a chat about it.
Let's do a podcast on it. It's really interesting because it's something I've thought a lot about with like my own experience, which was sort of racing mountain bikes very obsessively, like in that it was all I thought about.
Yeah.
Sort of through high school, and then I left school kind of early and had this attitude of, you know, the more I sacrifice, the more likely I am to achieve my dream of, you know, making it in the World Cup or whatever.
Well, you know, I think I've actually got a memory of you having a conversation like that with me.
Really?
My first interaction with you was probably 2015. You were probably, I mean, how old would you have been back then?
It was 2015. Actually, I'd stopped racing really at then.
Okay.
That was like, it was 2014 was.
That was actually
2014
that
was the
when it
most
was
intense.
because I was out at Glentress with Edinburgh Uni Cycling Club, and you gave me a lift back.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I remember
yeah.
we had a conversation. You were saying you're basically going to try and make a go of this thing.
Yeah.
And because I was asking you, like, you know, what do you do outside of biking? And you were like, actually, I'm just going to go for this. I'm going to commit as much as I can to try and make it.
Yeah.
Make a career out of this thing. Yeah.
And it's interesting because, yeah. So that was the year that it was, and for me it was a fairly short period of time. This is why it's so interesting looking at Olympic athletes, or, you know, the kind of athletes you'll be working with who've been competing for, you know, 10, 15 years, 20 years, some of them probably.
Yeah.
For me, it was like sort of, I mean, I started racing in 2009, stopped racing in 2014. So it was 5 years. And it was only really 2 or 3 years where I like left school when I was 16 and then I stopped racing. I just kind of lost it, like just after I turned 19.
Yeah.
So it's a fairly short period, but very intense. And I suppose quite formative years. And when I left school, I kind of like didn't keep in touch with a lot of people like outside of mountain biking. And I was just like, because you're having to work as well, obviously all winter to pay for your season. And then suddenly, like, this was my experience, didn't care anymore about the competing, and had this freedom of like, hey, I can do all these different things. Mm-hmm. And then it was like experiencing things that it was like being on a drug. You know, you're so focused just on competing, on your training, and then you don't have that structure anymore. And it's like I'm feeling anxious and I can't place. It's like, why do I feel anxious? I'm not about to compete. I'm not doing anything. Like
suddenly your purpose has changed. Your identity has also changed.
And then it's like, well, who am I? And then those are the sort of, I guess, some of the foundations of depression.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's very interesting, and it feels like maybe we're talking about it a little bit more now, but it's not something that I've not heard lots of people talking about it.
Yeah. So I think, you know, it's clear that you're already talking about a whole host of things. You're talking about like life transitions out of sport. What does that mean for your purpose? What does that mean for your career? What you do on a day-to-day basis? And, you know, clearly it also impacts on your mental health and well-being, because suddenly what you do, the purpose has changed. The people you spend your time with, that's probably also changed quite substantially. You're not out probably on the trails or in the gym or working with the same people quite to the same extent as you did before. The traveling, the structure all changes. So actually, like, there's this idea that, you know, when we go through these transitions, that it impacts not just on the sport, but on like lots of different areas of our life. And it can actually have a bit of an insidious impact, and you don't really realize it until you get to potentially quite a dark place.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, I guess, I mean, for the sake of the listeners, you know, I guess the reason we wanted to have this conversation is because I was never like a really high level mountain biker, high level athlete, but I guess after I met Christo and yourself that first time, I went on and basically did a PhD, and I was interested in looking at what's the best way to support high performing people. Basically, that was kind of the question I was interested in, and since then I've gone on and I work as a sports psychologist now at Stirling University, and kind of these conversations that we're having is something that you see a lot with the athletes who are kind of at that level where they're transitioning from junior to senior level, and they're in a university setting, usually trying to make it as a pro. And I mean, that I don't know if you experienced that as well, but once you go from kind of junior to senior, you're it's not just your training that needs to change. It's not just your commitment to the sport that needs to change, but the people you spend your time with, how much time you get to spend at home,
Yeah.
the sort of outgoings you've got, and those pressures all change. Don't know, what was your experience of that?
Well, for me, it was, I think sport is very good at levels through your formative kind of years, your adolescence.
Yeah.
Keeps you kind of focused and gave me a lot of confidence. But then it felt like I didn't really care too much about school anyway. Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't just racing that made me not care, but I put my whole identity, all my eggs into this one basket. And then it was a kind of slow progress. Like, I stopped competing, started feeling more just sort of symptoms of depression, and then also sought sort of other thrills, to replace the sort of high and buzz of racing World Cups. And then it just felt like I was like spat out into my 20s. And I was like, it was just a full-on kind of identity crisis and a confidence crisis.
Yeah.
Which took me I kind of worked it all out, and got back there, but it just made me think like, wow, I mean, and this is in a sport where, I love mountain biking, and I was mountain biking this whole time.
Yeah.
And the fact that I'd been training and things and cared about fitness, that really kept me very grounded always. I was very grateful to have that.
And would you say your transition, was that kind of planned or relatively unplanned?
Not planned at all, really. No. Which is, I'd be interested to talk to you about this, because mountain biking, especially downhill mountain biking, is a sport where you pretty much you just have to work it out yourself.
Yeah.
There's not too much institutional kind of help or whatever. So you don't, get that kind of thing. And it was very much not planned. I just suddenly didn't want to race. I just didn't care anymore.
And was it kind of there was a particular moment where the switch was flipped?
Yeah, it was my last World Cup, actually.
Yeah?
In Maribel. The race had been a bit of a disaster in terms of something wrong with my bike the whole time.
Yeah.
I'd missed track walk. Obviously, it's really hard to qualify anyway, especially as a first year elite.
Yeah.
And I was at the top for my run, and I knew my brake was contaminated.
Okay.
And I was like, it's not gonna happen. And I just didn't care. I was at the top and I was really relaxed about it, and it just didn't bother me that I wasn't going to be competing in this race.
Yeah. And
that was it, and it was gone, and then the rest was this sort of journey to I guess, I don't know, some sort of normality, and it's given me this just interest in and I'd be interested to know, there must be some sports that are worse for depression. Well, maybe a good ground, a good sort of base question is, how common do you think depression is in athletes, and what are the causes that maybe of it?
Well, I think it does depend on the sport, and like you say, in mountain biking, elite downhill mountain biking, there's little to no organizational support when you're trying to break into that professional level. And what you tend to find in most sports is that because performing at that level takes so much commitment, and it can take quite a lot of sacrifice, that actually, if you're going through these experiences where you start to devalue your own performances, you start to maybe feel a reduced sense of accomplishment when you actually are performing, that can lead to burnout. That is basically what burnout is. And that was basically one of the things I was looking at in my PhD was, so what kind of support is best for athletes in that situation. And you find that actually having organizational support behind you, knowing that there's some kind of plan B put in place for yourself, that really has a positive impact. Knowing that there's potentially some kind of tangible assistance or financial support behind you. I imagine you had to coordinate a lot of the traveling and things yourself, right?
Yeah, all of it. Yeah.
I mean, all that, stress mounts up, and actually a lot of these stressors and burnout experiences, they're well recognized precursors to poor mental health. So you can understand that across different sports, the risk for it might be a bit different, because like I actually think rugby, for example, that was the population I did most of my PhD with. I looked at the Scottish Rugby Academy system in Scotland, and they're actually really proactive and good about putting in a lot of essentially holistic support for their young athletes.
Yeah.
And so they find that these guys, basically when they sign a contract to say, okay, we're going to try and get you into professional rugby, you need to have a plan B in place.
Yeah.
It's not like an option.
Yeah.
It's not really an option to just go and play rugby. You have to go and have some kind of a part-time educational backup plan or career plan, or you have to speak to a mental health advisor every now and then. And so actually I think they're doing really well at tackling these kind of mental health risk factors, whereas in a sport like mountain biking, that support's just not in place yet, you know?
It's interesting where there's overlap in terms of, because for me growing up, it seemed culturally we kind of admire people who just go for one thing, and like they put all their eggs in one basket, and it's like it's either this or nothing. I remember listening to like some Eminem song, maybe, what is it, Lose Yourself or something?
Yeah,
exactly. That's basically what he's saying. And and like as a sort of teenager, and even a young
lionize
adult,
that and idolize
exactly,
that.
idolize it, because you see that as well. We glorify people that make it work. You know, like the Conor McGregors who was like benefits in Ireland and just was obsessed with this one thing.
Yeah.
And we see it where it works, but we don't see the
dark side of it.
The fallout of that. Yeah,
so some people talk about like the shadow traits of mental toughness, right? So like, I think Kobe Bryant in basketball was actually, was he the one that spoke about like Mamba mentality? And, this idea of like, you have to be on the court practicing like 2 hours before everyone else gets there. And you have to stay there until after everyone's gone as well. And like, yeah, sure, from a skill development perspective, that makes sense. But actually, how's that impacting on your family life? How's that impacting on your, just you as a person holistically? And it's quite easy for society to then like make a big deal out of that. They're like, oh, this person has come through and committed everything they had to succeed at the highest level. Isn't that a great success story? But actually, the problem is then you've got like, younger riders, younger athletes at the bottom level hearing those stories, and they're like, oh, that's what I need to do.
Exactly.
That's what I need to do to succeed at the highest level. And what you don't hear about very often is the shadow side of that, the dark side of actually, giving everything up to just pursue sport at the highest level.
Yeah.
I mean, I was listening to a podcast about Laurie Greenland and his coach recently, and I thought it was interesting to hear how like a big thing for them was to make sure that, holistically speaking, Laurie had a lot of support in other areas of his life put in place. And that's good, because you don't have that feeling of, when you get to the start gate, for example, you're like, I've made so many sacrifices to get here, spent so much money, I have to make this count. Otherwise it feels like there's a lot of pressure on you. There's a lot of time wasted.
Whole sense of self, especially once you've sacrificed everything else, is tied up into each. It becomes so intense. If I look back on the last year, and this was definitely a case of burnout, the last year I was racing, 2014, that off season, I like fully didn't really talk to anyone other than the people I was riding with. I was working just in an office, doing something I found very boring for long hours, just so I could rest after training. We were in the gym for like 2.5 hours, 3 hours, 4 times a week, and then just trying to ride on top of that. And if I look back in that winter, like, I don't look back warmly, even on the summer, like even on the fun times, like traveling around in the van, like I look back on it always with this, like, it's exactly what you say, it wasn't whole, it wasn't complete, it was too much of one thing, and that intensity definitely and it like grates at you. And
there can be a bitterness attached to it, right, as well. Like, while I've put all of this time and energy in, and I'm seeing people I went to school with buying houses, and like, it should be paying off. That's like, the success story that I've got in my head. That's what's supposed to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
So actually that bitterness can really, it can get to you, it can make, and that's ultimately what, you know, causes people to drop out. And the crucial thing is, once you go through that exit experience, you know, like yourself, because you've spent so much time actually investing in your sport and the performance, that there's no other net to catch you. I mean, you know, how much, if I was to, you know, throw the question back at you, how much time and resource would you say that you put into like other areas of your life during that time?
None. I mean, none whatsoever. Like, I remember, not just because of mountain biking. I mean, I enjoyed school and I enjoyed going to parties and not and just kind of, you know, pissing around, which I look back on very fondly.
That's important, those experiences.
Exactly, because it was fun.
Yeah.
And like, that was super fun. And then the racing was this thing that started off very healthy. Like, it was giving me confidence.
Yeah.
It was getting me fit. It was giving me friends. Like, I was passionate about it. But this mentality of like, this kind of cultural, I don't know what you call it, like a certain kind of cultural narrative that idolized this.
It's like purity.
Yes, exactly.
It's like, it's almost like you're abstaining from things like, you know, partying hard or like those sorts of things in service of being a better athlete, being a better person.
It becomes quite controlling, I think.
It can, and you know, there's stuff around like that's partially what leads to things like eating disorders in sport.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like, for myself, I used to, and if it is, I mean, it's so on the line of eating disorders. Like, I decided like bread, and also because sport attracts people that have that certain like intensity in them or whatever.
Yeah.
But then
sort of a vigilance around those things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I would like boil brown rice to come riding, and then like buy stuff to put on. I mean, it was just like insane.
But then there's a whole social situation that plays in around that, because like, you bring the brown rice to the ride, you take it out your, you know, your hip bag or your backpack or whatever, and like, people laugh at you and they're like, what are you doing? But you can have this almost elitist mentality within you, and when you're in that, you don't realize that it can actually be quite toxic.
Yes, to the others around you as well.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah. And you know, they might tease you in the moment, but actually they then kind of reinforce it and say like, well, you know, he's really committed. He's getting the results that's what he needs to do to succeed, basically.
Exactly, yeah. And weirdly enough, I'd be interested to talk to you just on this first point, and like, because that certain mentality of like, wow, he's really, you know, he's really working hard. Even the idea of working hard is kind of bullshit the more I think about it, because it's like, you know, what do you mean? To me at that time, working hard, which is this cultural virtue, was, you know, sacrificing friends, sacrificing fun,
showing mental toughness in the face of adversity.
Exactly,
that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Working all the time and then training, overtraining. That was to me working hard.
Yeah.
And like, you know, and if you take it to this sort of business world, what is it? It's like not seeing your family, not seeing your friends, being the first in the office and the last out, not necessarily doing the most and doing the most quality work, but it's like, we value obsession and we value sacrifice beyond a sort of holistic, you know, just balanced life. For me, the thing was like, just because I am probably quite an obsessive, so I just obsessed around different. Have you ever seen Inside Out, the film?
Yeah.
I love that film because.
So your main character is one of the more like obsessive ones. He's at the control panel.
Yeah, exactly. And then they have the islands. You know, so for me it was about building up those other islands of personality. But yeah, how sort of this must be a common thing, not just in sport, but you know, outside of it as well.
Yeah, it is, and I mean, you see that in other areas of work. You know, like in. You know, you can see like the Wall Street world, for example, like the people who work at the biggest investment banks, you know, they're putting in like 70+ hour working weeks, and like they don't take time off. If you take time off, you're kind of seen as weak. And then we also have these films like, you know, Wolf of Wall Street, and it's like, I know it's designed to be like a bit bonkers and entertaining, but at the same time, like
there's all the memes on Instagram and there's people that idolize it.
Exactly. Like people, you know, it is idolized, and this is why I think, you know, watching the recent Olympics, people like Simone Biles flipping the script a bit and actually saying that, well, you know, what is hard work? What is sacrifice? It's not about like pushing through the pain and performing when you're not feeling well because of, you know, you need to please people, you need to live up to a certain level of success. It's actually because mental toughness and working hard looks like saying, you know what, my mental health and my well-being is not where it needs to be today. I'm going to choose to look after myself in the first instance. And actually, I think coming from someone like that at the very top, biggest sporting event in the world, that has the potential to change the script. And actually, social media and other kind of influential people need to listen to that and reinforce that as well. Because I mean, like you say, I imagine you were exposed to social media or stories where the opposite, that bad narrative of
it's funny, there was a video, I remember watching this video, and I watched it because I loved at the time what it was saying.
Yeah.
And it was it's called How Bad Do You Want It?
Yeah.
It's some American football. I don't know if you've seen it. It went kind of viral, and
sounds like super motivational and
exactly.
The sacrifices you got to make.
And it was don't sleep, don't do anything else, don't do just work on achieving your dream, give up everything.
And how does that work out most of the time?
And it's not even good for your performance.
No,
I mean,
exactly.
do you find when you're working with athletes,
totally, yeah,
is that something? Because I know when I came back to racing a little bit, before I kind of went to the US and stopped riding for a couple of years, and haven't. I'm just sort of coming back from that now. But when I was racing, and I had built a life again, I performed better, even though I didn't care as much nearly. But
I mean, from a psychological perspective, it makes sense, right? Like if it gives you that perspective of, it's actually just a bike race. I've got other things in my life that are just as important. I've got a partner, I've got a job, or I'm studying for something that I'm interested in, and those things can actually take the pressure off you to perform well. There's less of a I must or I should be doing this, and it becomes more of a I would like to do this, but It's not the end of the world if it doesn't happen. You see that with a lot of athletes, especially when they get older and they maybe have kids, right? Gives them a different perspective on things, and they're well, I still train hard and whatnot, but I've got other things in my life. My life is more well balanced, so that actually, if I don't perform the way I want to, that's okay. It's just one part of my life, and
exactly.
It can actually improve your performance as a result. It takes the pressure right off and gives you more resources that you can draw on in a time of need. You've got more friends potentially, other sources of income, so you don't have to worry about the prize money, things like that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. It's interesting, and it seems like, this Olympics was weirdly as well for me. So when I was competing as well, I loved documentaries around sport. I loved the Olympics. This was the core of it, was these people have sacrificed everything to achieve their dream. That was why I loved it.
Yeah.
And this Olympics, and even just since, I look at sport in a much more different way. I look at these athletes and I'm it's great and it's cool that we really idolize it. We worship
the story is exciting.
Yeah. We love that narrative. That's the hero's journey. They start from nothing, they sacrifice everything, and they get the gold. But it seems as you say, with Simone Biles, there was someone else, I can't remember. I read an article just talking about, the incentives for countries to get gold medals. Yeah. And then just thinking about how many athletes don't get medals. And at the Olympics, really, it's all about the medals.
It is. And but you might have seen the stuff on Netflix about Athlete A and the abuse culture in gymnastics, right? There's a danger there that if we keep reinforcing that narrative, then you produce these cultures which are well, it's performance at all costs.
Yes, yeah.
And if you don't want to live like that, then well, you're not going to get on the podium. So and I think got organizations like UK Sport, they're trying to do things a bit differently, where it's well, rather than doing it on medal count over 4 years, we're going to look at medal potential over 12 years. So and checking to see if people are getting jobs after they leave sport. Is the number of suicides going down after they retire from sport? Because these are real problems. There's a lot of negative after effects of this performance only culture, make lots of personal sacrifices to succeed.
Do you know anything? I mean, is suicide higher amongst ex-athletes?
Amongst some groups of athletes, yes, they are actually. And you also find that like the incidence of mental illness, for example, amongst some types of athletes for some types of illnesses is higher, it's elevated, and that's partially because of the unique stress that they get put through, right? I mean, you know, most people, they experience stress in their day-to-day life, but actually whether or not they perform well, they're still, you know, going to get to potentially go home and they'll get their paycheck, whereas with an athlete that's not necessarily guaranteed. And then on top of that, you've also got all of this media exposure, which can massively overinflate and worsen things. I mean, you hear stories about like, you know, athletes when they put their Instagram story about like how they performed that day, and it just takes one comment to like push you over the edge, and you can ignore all of the other positive comments, for example. And yeah, so there is a risk for increased mental illness, and as a result, increased risk of suicide among some groups of athletes. So, you know, the question for me then comes back to what can we do about it? Because we've already spoken about, like, you know, Simone Biles flipping the script, changing the story a bit, other athletes following in her footsteps. So I'd like to kind of flip the question back to you.
Yeah.
What was the biggest turning point for you when you were at your low point? What helped the most?
It's a good question. I think it was interesting for me because, so I started an access course.
What motivated you to do that? That was after you stopped, right?
Yeah, part of that was a continuation of the sort of competitiveness and intensity that, you know, led me to
obsessiveness
sport,
being applied
exactly.
to something else.
And then, like, I'm dyslexic, and when I was always felt kind of like, especially in primary school, like I wasn't clever enough, or like I felt like I had something to prove. So, and I'd always sort of thought if I hurt myself in sport, I was gonna go, and I had law in my mind.
Okay, yeah.
Partly because I wanted to do something good with it, and partly just as a sort of desire to prove that I could, as someone that had this sort of thing about not being sort of good enough academically or clever enough.
So you want to go straight for law?
And I did exactly the same thing with the access course. I put all my eggs in one basket, and I've never worked so hard because I was working full time, and then I was doing this in the evening.
Right, yeah.
And then I had this big kind of thing where I was like, man, I don't like sitting behind a computer all day. And I'm doing this like for some reason, partly just to prove that it seemed like I'm a sort of written based guy, and that was the degree that was like had the most was seen as the most competitive
status and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. Seen as the most kind of prestigious. And then I kind of wrestled with it, and then I switched, and I did at first sociology, and then switched to philosophy, which kind of had everything I liked about law, but was a bit more interesting.
Suits you, you're quite a philosophical guy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and then I loved it, and so that was part of the kind of, I loved going to university, I loved thinking about other stuff. I had more balance, I was meeting more people.
You see, now that's what you've just said there. That's kind of what I would say is the number one thing that individual people can do, like athletes can do, is this idea of you felt more balanced, you were meeting new people. So actually there's been like quite a lot of innovative work around like, well, you know, we know that athletes face unique stresses that perhaps people in normal day-to-day jobs don't, but you know, not everyone is going to, you know, stay away from elite sport because of the risk for that. So what can we put in place? How can we support them? And actually this idea of what groups are you a part of? And I know that sounds like a bit almost wishy-washy, but it's like, if you think about what you just said there, you know, you were suddenly involved in like an academic community, meeting new people, like you probably wouldn't have met.
It was filling my mind with new things.
Exactly. So the idea there is like, if you can grow the number of groups you're a part of, either physically or even psychologically, you know, like I'm someone who's studying philosophy, I'm part of this group of students who's like meeting new people, as well as a mountain biker, as well as an athlete. I mean, that gives you so many more identities, so many more resources to draw on when you do encounter those stressors.
That's really interesting, because that's pretty much what I realized. part of my thing as well, I don't know if this is to do with sport or, I mean, drugs were a part of it.
Yeah.
Just to replace that, partly like the thrill.
Yeah.
But it was still very obsessive and still very like, I became very obsessive, like dangerously kind of, like that was where sport kind of saved me, because fitness always mattered to me more than, like that was always very a cornerstone like of my identity. So, but if it wasn't for that, there would have been nothing stopping me, just be like, yeah, I'm just going to, just party. Because that was the only thing I was excited about. That was the sort of thrill I was getting.
Yeah.
And then part of it was like this, I've always like thought of myself as confident. That's always been part of my identity.
Yeah, okay.
But I actually started to kind of, I wasn't actually practicing confidence. And then I was like losing this thing. I didn't feel confident. I was like feeling socially anxious.
Yeah.
And then that was crushing to my identity, because I was like, that's not. And then the thing that changed it was realizing, in a way, everything is like sport. Everything needs maintained. Everything needs like training, essentially. But it has to be, like for me, it was like, you can't just have one thing. It has to be, as you say, lots of things.
And the thing, that's actually what's like threatening to a lot of like athletes when they decide to leave sport, or actually more commonly when they're like forced to leave sport because of an unplanned injury or whatever. But the thing is, they actually find it really anxiety provoking to suddenly think like, whoa, I'm supposed to, go and make new friends who aren't athletes. I'm supposed to go and study something or get a job that I've never done before. Like your sense of confidence disappears when that happens.
Because you think you're confident because you're just in this little world.
This little world where actually you're very good at one thing, but then actually once you get out there, you start to make those connections, and applying yourself, you actually find that a lot of those soft skills you learned as an athlete are very transferable.
Yeah.
And actually it can then help you grow as a person, because you're like, well, actually, if I just apply myself, get through the bits I'm struggling with, just like I do with training, hey, I can complete, an access course. I can go to uni. I can get a job. I can get an internship. I can get an apprenticeship. I can make new friends who aren't mountain bikers. Fancy that. So, but that's a bit of a hurdle for people to get over initially. So the idea is, can you start to bridge that gap before you leave sport? Because it sounds to me like that didn't really happen with you until after.
No, I mean, I did have that. That was where I was lucky, actually, because I very much had that in school.
Yeah.
So I had that to go back on. Like, this is the thing I feel for like swimmers and stuff, because I was like, it was really only when I was like 16, like until before then I had lots of friends. I was like very social, and I had that identity. I knew who that person was, who I liked. I liked that person.
Yeah. And you didn't have to make that sacrifice from such a young age, like swimmers or gymnasts might have to do. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it was just this period of sort of late teens, very early 20s. And then once I realized, like, it's just like, I just need to confront fear, basically.
Yeah.
Because I got like, like, I was like, no, I'm not like this. I'm like this. And these were like,
you can start to see yourself in really fixed terms, but it's, I think mountain biking in some ways is quite forgiving for getting out of that, because it's like you say, it's a lifestyle sport.
Exactly.
I mean, swimmers, like I say, swimmers, gymnasts, those people need to commit, very heavily from a very early age. And it's maybe not quite as much of a lifestyle sport as like some of the outdoor sports are. And so you can think when they, are potentially forced to leave sport at age like 21, 22, that's a pretty scary prospect, having to like go out into the big bad world and find yourself at that point and try new things.
Yeah, because who are you? You're a swimmer. Like that's
exactly. Yeah.
That's interesting. And so do you find then with your work with athletes in sports like swimming, like sports where they've done it from an early age, where maybe like you have to like work with them to build a life outside of sport?
Yeah, there can be a little bit more work. I mean, it does also come down to the resilience of the individual. You find that some people maybe didn't actually have a very healthy upbringing, and then like sport was their escape. In which case, actually, that can be quite hard for them to then like try and explore different parts of their identity, for example. And then the other factor, of course, is that some sports have got more of a stigma against that sort of thing than others. So like, surfing, climbing, actually, I think it's quite like endorsed in those communities that like, oh, you know, like Brad during the week, he's like a biology teacher. Like, that's pretty cool. Whereas like, I mean, you get other sports where that's maybe not quite as reinforced and praised. And, you know, like I've been in cycling environments where actually the kind of, like we said earlier, that clinical individual who is just training all the time is, you know, and they're really committed, that sort of stuff is reinforced. So I think, yeah, in some sports, there's more of an obstacle to overcome there than others. It depends on the culture. But again, you know, we can all play a role in changing that script. Simone Biles is a great example of that. And yeah, I think it does depend on the sport. But the other thing we can do is we can try and educate the people who work in those environments. We can educate the coaches, we can educate the parents, and we can also just reinforce people to like, you know, send out these messages like, you know, it's actually a good thing to like explore who you are outside of your sport, build other relationships, try other things. And yeah, I'd like to think that the social norms around that might change with time.
How difficult do you think it is navigating the, like, and this is something that we all to some extent or another, like we're trying to achieve some balance. And for me, I know like, for a lot of athletes, I think are the same, balance quite quickly, like, you know, it becomes, you know, quite obsessive. Like,
yeah,
you start doing a little bit of thing. I remember I was listening to Mike Tyson in an interview.
Yeah.
And he was saying at the time, it's changed now, he was saying he doesn't even exercise anymore. Because as soon as you start exercising,
yeah,
he gets super competitive about it. His ego gets involved.
Yeah.
And then I heard him a couple of years later, and he's done fights since then.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I started exercising. Before you know it, I'm on the treadmill for like 9 hours.
Yeah, I think there's something about that. Like if you grew up, you know, thinking of yourself as an athlete and you're like really committed to one thing, and then you go through the transition like we discussed. You know, for example, who was it? It was Martin Ashton, actually, in his TED Talk. He talks about this after he had his accident, where, you know, he was this amazing rider before his accident. And then he was like, he went through the sort of grieving process of the accident. But then, you know, when he found out that there's like, you know, Paralympics performance programs, he was like, actually, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take that same drive and I'm going to apply it to this. And he talks about like how he went and he tried canoeing and he was no good at it and he really struggled with that. But then you can, like you say, you can also equally become obsessive about other things, like, you know, studying or, you know, trying to prove that actually I'm someone who can nail law if I apply myself to it. And yeah, I think there's probably a bit of you know, introspection and reflection that needs to happen there, where actually it's like, I don't have to be amazing at everything I try. Actually just accepting that, you know, it's good to have a little bit of balance in all areas of my life. I don't have to just give myself over to something 110% all the time. And I think that's quite hard for high achievers, people who are used to working very hard, to like essentially just relax a little bit. Yeah, and accept that. Yeah. Get in touch with what really matters to them is quite a hard thing to do, actually. And you know, the other thing I just thought of there is sport and performance sport. It's you know, and I don't mean this in a horrible way, but it's quite a selfish thing.
Totally.
So like everything you do is about how can I be better?
Yeah.
But actually, once you move past that, you start to realize that, you know what, it's not just about me. Like, what can I give back to the sport? What can I give back to other people? But I think that can take quite a bit of work to move to that space, you know?
What are the, like, how do you help people get there? Because that is a tough one. And
it is.
You know, I don't know, for me it was like, I'd say I'm less I'm competitive in some ways, but I think for me, removing this of like, you need to work hard, you know, for some things, but not just, I don't know, partly people you're around, you know, being around people that aren't too competitive and
chill
and fun, and it's like, having fun and caring about the people you're with.
But this is why I said, you know, the groups you're a part of, they matter. Like, what are the sorts of things that your friends say to you on a day-to-day basis? I know that they just sound like, you know, day-to-day conversations, but over time, that does shape what you value. So actually, like,
I love that I think it was the Red Bull coach said, you become the average of your 5 closest
yeah, I think,
friends.
Yeah, and to some extent, that is actually quite true. You start to value the things they value. You know, if you're in a group of people who are obsessive about bike riding and bike racing all the time, that's what you're going to value. I saw that change in myself, like, because I saw myself as an amateur athlete, although never very successful, you know. And then when I went into the PhD environment, suddenly it was like, okay, like all of my friends, all of my colleagues and stuff, they're all really like stoked on research and trying to get published in really high impact papers. And then over time, I become like that as well. And then, but that's why, again, it's about balance. It's about having other groups in your life who can balance you out a little bit. And the other thing is, some people just aren't, you know, they're not ready. They're not at a place in their headspace yet where they're like, I'm ready to maybe be less focused on myself and maybe more focused on like the kind of person I could be towards others, or the kind of, you know, other things that they value. Some people are more ready for that change than others, and with that being said, not everyone needs to change like that. But yeah, I actually think I remember you saying that to me when you gave me that lift a few years ago. And yeah, I would definitely say there's a degree of truth to that. So you just better make sure that you don't only have 5 people in your life.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah,
it's a really important one. Like, what I find around most athletes, and I was lucky because I had this identity and this experience that wasn't just sport, that was just fun and social, like just, you know, everyone taking the piss out of each other and everyone just funny about that, and like, because it's about, you know, a sort of value hierarchy. It's like, if you value fun with your friends above, you know, your ego related to this particular piss taking you're enjoying, then that's fun and that's good. Whereas like athletes, the environment does become, it's much more competitive. You're surrounded by people you're competing with, and it's so important. I mean, having those other groups, I think it's got to be one of the sort of
it is, and that's what you actually. So this is interesting. It's like, it was research that was done like completely outside of sport, but it's like a classic thought experiment you can ask someone is, you know, what do you think are some of the greatest risk factors to health? People tend to say things like smoking and obesity, right? But actually there's quite a bit of evidence to show that it's about...
Go over here and continue chatting.
No worries. There's actually quite a bit of work to show that it's like the number of people you have in your life, how socially integrated are you? That actually, you know, that has a much bigger impact on like how long you're likely to live, how happy you're likely to be, and yeah, like your mental health and well-being. Other people are the key, but they can also be the
what's causing the problem.
Yeah. So
that is interesting, because that's become the thing for me now, the thing that the highest value for me, basically. Because if I think of the times in my life where I look back most fondly, when I was having the most fun, 100%, it's just the times I'm like around people that I relate to, that are fun, that are not too competitive, that you're relaxed around, and like that is constant. And so now I think that is like the most important thing to me, and everything else kind of has to slot into that, and not the other way around, where you take some random thing, and sport is ultimately like you know, jumping or just doing some particular thing under a particular set of circumstances, and raising that above the, you know, the more important stuff.
And it can unfortunately take some people like a bit of a downward journey, right? Going to a bad place before they realize, you know what, the thing that the performance sport environment values is not what I value. And that's when maybe you get to this point where you realize, actually it's the people in my life or those sorts of things that I value. And then that gives you that balance. And I think that's priceless, actually. It gives you you know, people to draw on when you need it. It gives you resources to keep your mental health and your well-being in check. So yeah,
absolutely. What do you think then, just to sort of finish, Chris, is like,
sure,
because we could talk about issues around these probably all day, but like, I'm interested in, you know, the people listening are maybe they're unlikely to be competing at that kind of to, you know, to that degree, or, you know, to be into sport to that degree. But what are the lessons that we touched on?
Yeah.
Because this is like, I'm finding this now, even in the job I'm doing at the moment. It's, it's a different culture, and this thing of like working long hours and stuff is kind of part of it. What are the lessons that people can take?
Yeah.
Apply it to normal life.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, it's just to be really conscious of some of the like toxic stories and narratives that can be fed to you. And like you said, it's not just something that we see at top level sport. We see it in amateur sport, right? You turn on the news, you go on social media. Just be really aware of like the influence that like those messages can have on what you value, what you think is important to do. The other thing is to be aware that when you go through some kind of a transition, whether that's moving from junior to senior, you're going through an injury, or maybe you're leaving a sport for a period of time, appreciate that that's not the only transition you're going through. You're suddenly changing your social group. You're probably changing what you do on a day-to-day basis. Your sense of purpose is going to change. So put things in place proactively to deal with that. And the last thing is just don't underestimate the importance that groups can have in your life. Like, have people inside sport, outside sport, to give you that balance and to kind of, just give you more resources to draw on.
And it's true, I was just thinking there, like they talk about like empty nest syndrome and things like that.
Yeah,
it's exactly
yeah.
the same thing. If you're like a parent, or something's occupied a big chunk of your life, it's like making sure there's other things there, a relationship. People go through this sometimes, putting too much into one thing, or like just have those other things like kind of going on.
I mean, as cheesy as it sounds, balance is kind of what matters here.
That's it.
Yeah.
Cool, man. That's been super interesting.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Enjoyed it.
It feels like we've been talking for about 10 minutes, but we've come up quite a long time. So we're gonna go and ride. We're all on kind of XC bikes, so something kind of chill.
Cool. Well, I haven't ridden here since Scottish Champs 2013, so things have changed a fair bit since then. But thanks for bringing me out.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for coming. It's super
nice fun. Should be chill. We'll go by the sounds I make. We'll make that decision.
Riding flat pedals again. First time in a while. Woo! Oh.
You can talk slow, Mark.
Here are super steep and rough. And then there's a choice. You're shredding.
Oh jeez.
Summer is ending. This is the darkest. Whoa! Ridden in a while. Crazy highlight in a while.
Oh geez, which way?
This forest has such beautiful greenery. Oh my god! There's an absolute trench.
Did your front wheel disappear?
I like just lifted it up to go over it, but then it just like came down at the worst point. That is an absolute. It's quite a deep hole.
Watch, you're about to lose your water bottle. Oh well, let's keep on going if you're all good.
Yeah, 2 seconds.
That was good action.
Yeah.
Can't handle the pace of the Hartley.
It's good fun, I like it.
Yeah, it is quite good fun.
Cool, we all good?
Yeah, good.
Sweet.
Alright, recovered. Whoa. I'm scared now.
Let's keep down here.
Yeah, just keep going.
Whoa. Oh, it's getting wild.
Nice one.
Ooh!
Punch the tree.
There's so many.
May have punched the tree back there.
Whoa!
Oh,
almost thought Dunkeld
lovely
was
wee
kinda
bog.
Like, rather soft.
Oh, I'm gonna.
Oh no!
Oh, I moved the GoPro.
Don't worry. We'll resort it.
That watch, I'm sure, is what's causing
Oh, really?
a wrist problem. It's really sore. I put it on my right wrist and it's sore.
I think I saw that on the climb up. You've got like a mega watch tan on the one arm.
Yeah, I was like, I got it in like January, and then just I don't know, I've just been getting sort of gradually like worse, the wrist problem.
That trail was gnarly enough to undo the boa. The boa system.
Dropping in a bit. There's a bit more to drop through.
Sweet. Well, when I went into the bog there, the camera moved. So, see what this looks like.
Where is it? Bring it up a bit. So just like a little bit. There we go. That should probably do. That'll do. Yeah, that looks good.
Cool. All right. We good?
Yeah, it's good.
Sweet.
Just the last section.
No, there's a couple of sections.
It's quite a long trail, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Oh no.
Oh.
I had flashbacks.
Bike making healthy noises there.
Such a beautiful forest. Whoa! Quite, this is like the most wild I've gotten on a ride in ages.
It's riding that little bike.
Yeah, it's quite different, isn't it? Especially on these trails, these are quite rough. Well,
Caution! That's reassuring. Man. That's pretty sweet.
Keeps on
it was
going.
fun. It was really fun. Keep on going.
Yeah, it keeps going.
Oh, where?
Just here.
Oh,
Should be. Yeah, just there.
just keeps
Cool.
giving.
Just through here, yeah?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a bit rougher than the stuff we've been riding on in the Pentlands.
Rough bit coming up.
Whoa! Oh, roots. Oh!
Inside line. And
Keep
there's
on
more.
going. Last bit.
What is this trail?
Focus now, there's so much stuff here. This is actually just.
This is not the Dunkeld I remember.
Right, it feels so much gnarly.
Whoa!
Whoa!
Oh jeez.
So much fun.
Oh, whoa! Oh, getting a bit spicy here.
Pretty overgrown.
Jeez.
But quite a.
Couldn't get further away from it if I tried. That was great.
It's super fun. Sweet. Thank you so much, man.
Nice, dude. Enjoyed that. Thanks
Very
for
good.
showing me around.
We'll need to get you back on at some point.
Would love it. Would love it.
Sweet.
Oh,
Thanks, man.
yeah, no worries.
I really hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, give it a like or a comment or a subscription. Doesn't have to be all free. Give us your feedback in the comments. One of the comments we had in a recent podcast was that people don't like me hearing, they don't want like me to say like, comment and subscribe in every video. It wasn't actually a comment in a video, it was a comment from a friend. And as you can see, I took it on board. It's become a big thing now that I'm not going to push that anymore. So give us your feedback, we'll take it on board. Like our video, maybe. See you next week. Thanks for watching.